In a large company like Davis International Consulting, it seems to be very serious and fair, but you will not expect that. A cleaning staff is harassed by the leaders, who will speak up to help her fight back. The leaders have been disciplined and the company system has been purged. What happened? Follow to see how the story unfolds, how justice is served only on H2 Black Thread. Don't forget to leave a comment sharing your thoughts and subscribe to the channel to stay updated with our latest videos, because the truth deserves to be told. Let's begin. Emily Davis had once been a name spoken with respect in the prestigious halls of Davis International Consulting. As the CEO and founder, she had spent years building the company from the ground up, creating a place where integrity, hard work, and loyalty were the pillars of success. She had been the driving force behind the firm's early triumphs, and everything had seemed perfect. But then, everything changed. A sudden and unforeseen health issue forced her to take a step back from the company she had spent her life creating. She handed over the reins to the trusted executives she had carefully selected, two in particular, Jonathan Turner and Rebecca Harris, with the hope that they would continue her legacy of ethical business practices. For the first time in her career, Emily stepped away from the spotlight, retreating into the privacy of her home and taking time to heal. Little did she know that the time she spent recovering would be the beginning of the downfall of everything she had worked for. The company, once a beacon of success, gradually became a shadow of its former self under Jonathan and Rebecca's management. The once thriving consulting firm, known for its exceptional service to Fortune 500 companies, started to show cracks in its ethical foundations. The principles Emily had instilled in the company seemed to erode with each passing day. The executives grew arrogant, power-hungry, and dismissive of those they once considered their equals. The employees, from the junior staff to the, were nothing more than tools for the company's success, to be used and discarded when they no longer served a purpose. Emily had heard the whispers, the complaints, and the rumors. As she spent months away from the office, the stories of misconduct and disrespect reached her ears. She knew she had to return, not as the CEO but as an observer. The company she had built was crumbling, and she couldn't stand by and watch it happen. So, Emily decided to return to Davis International Consulting, but not as the woman they all remembered. No, she would come back in a way that no one would recognize her, a cleaner. By taking on the humble and unnoticed role, Emily could observe the company from the bottom up. She would see how far the rot had spread and whether there was any hope of saving what she had created. Every morning she arrived before the sun rose, when the halls were empty and the office was quiet. She donned her cleaner's uniform, simple, gray, and unassuming, and quietly made her way through the gleaming marble halls of the company's headquarters. Her cleaning cart, laden with supplies, was the only sign of life in the otherwise sterile environment. She silently moved from room to room, wiping down counters, taking out the trash, and ensuring that the office remained spotless. To the world, Emily was just another faceless worker, invisible to the higher-ups who only saw her as part of the background. But Emily didn't just focus on her cleaning tasks. Her true focus was on the people who occupied the building, particularly the executives who ran the company. She watched how they interacted with the lower-tier employees, how they treated the staff that made everything run smoothly. Her eyes were sharp, and she saw things that most others did not. Every gesture, every word spoken, every subtle look was recorded in her mind as she moved silently from one room to the next. The first person she observed was Jonathan Turner, the CEO. Jonathan had always been a charismatic leader, a man who knew how to charm investors and clients alike with his smooth talk and confident demeanor. But in the years since Emily had stepped away from the company, Jonathan's arrogance had grown to unsettling proportions. He carried himself like a king, walking the halls of the building with his head held high, as though he owned not just the company but everyone within it. His treatment of the staff was particularly appalling. He looked down on the junior employees, speaking to them with condescension and disdain. The receptionist was often the target of his cutting remarks, his words laced with insults disguised as jokes. Emily had witnessed this firsthand when she saw him pass by the front desk one morning. He barely acknowledged the receptionist's greeting, his eyes flicking over her as if she were nothing more than a piece of furniture. The way Jonathan treated the staff made Emily's blood boil, but she held herself in check. She knew that this was just the beginning. She needed to gather more information before she could act. Emily also observed Rebecca Harris, the company's CFO, who was no less dismissive of the staff than Jonathan. Rebecca had always been a shrewd businesswoman, someone who had earned her place at the top through intelligence and cunning. However, in recent years, her behavior had grown increasingly erratic. She had become cold, calculating, and indifferent to the well-being of the employees who worked for her. Rebecca was known for making cutting remarks about the cleanerial staff, as if they were somehow beneath her. Emily could see that Rebecca's disregard for the people who kept the company running was not just a matter of arrogance. It was something far deeper, a toxic attitude that had infected the entire management team. One morning, while Emily was cleaning the hallway outside Jonathan's office, she overheard a conversation between Jonathan and Rebecca. The words they spoke made her stomach churn. "It's getting hard to justify keeping the cleanerial staff," Rebecca remarked, her voice dripping with contempt. "Our offices should be spotless. It's embarrassing." Jonathan laughed, a harsh, dismissive sound. "They can be replaced anytime. They don't have the skills to do anything else." Emily's heart sank as she listened. This was exactly what she had feared. The people who kept the company running, the people who made sure everything functioned smoothly, were seen as expendable. To Jonathan and Rebecca, the cleaners, the receptionists, the assistants, they were nothing more than tools to be discarded once they had outlived their usefulness. It wasn't surprising to Emily. She had seen firsthand how the executives treated their staff with disrespect. But hearing it confirmed, overhearing their conversation so casually, was a wake-up call. The company she had once founded, the company that had stood for integrity and respect, had become a playground for the powerful to indulge their egos. Emily knew that she couldn't allow this to continue. Still, she was patient. She needed to observe more, to gather more evidence, and to see just how far the corruption ran within the company. Her time as a cleaner was an opportunity to watch, to learn, and to plan. As Emily continued her daily rounds, she couldn't help but notice the growing hostility in Jonathan's interactions with her. At first, she had dismissed it as the natural arrogance of a man who thought himself untouchable. But soon it became clear that his behavior toward her was something far more sinister. His comments started as offhand remarks about her cleaning abilities, but quickly escalated into inappropriate advances. Emily tried to ignore it, chalking it up to Jonathan's entitled nature, but when he made an unsolicited comment about her appearance one afternoon, her patience began to wear thin. "You know, Sarah," he said, his voice oily and suggestive, "you could clean this place a little better. Especially when someone like me is around." He leaned in closer, his breath cold against her neck. "I think someone as pretty as you deserves more than this job. If you cooperate, I could make sure you get something better around here." Emily's stomach churned. She had spent years building this company, and now she was being degraded by someone she had trusted to carry it forward. She could feel the shift in the power dynamic. Jonathan wasn't just trying to belittle her. He was testing how far he could push. How far could he take this before she gave in? But Emily wasn't about to let him win. She held her ground, forcing herself to remain calm despite the disgust rising within her. "I'm happy with my job, thank you," she said, her voice level despite the turmoil inside. Jonathan didn't seem satisfied. His advances only became bolder over time, and Emily realized that this wasn't just about cleaning or her job anymore. This was about control, manipulation, and power. But Emily wasn't going to let him have that power. She would play the long game. The day would come when she would reveal herself, not just to Jonathan and Rebecca, but to the entire company. And when that moment came, everything would change. Emily Davis had hoped that, as she continued her quiet observation of Davis International Consulting, she would discover that the company's ethical decline had been exaggerated. But as days turned into weeks, the ugly truth became more undeniable with each passing moment. The executives she had once trusted, the very people she had entrusted with the company's future, were no better than the individuals she had once vowed to protect the business from. The more Emily worked as a cleaner, the more she began to understand the toxic culture that had taken root in the company. Jonathan Turner, the CEO, was a man whose arrogance knew no bounds. His actions were increasingly bold and brazen, and his treatment of the lower-level employees was both repulsive and disturbing. As the days passed, Emily felt herself becoming more uncomfortable, not only with Jonathan's behavior, but also with the broader atmosphere of entitlement that hung over the building. From the moment Emily stepped into the office each morning, she could feel the shift in the air. Jonathan, with his neatly tailored suits and expensive watch, strutted through the halls like a king, his every move punctuated by a sharp, dismissive look at anyone who dared cross his path. His arrogance wasn't just a part of his personality. It was an armor that he used to protect his fragile ego. It became more evident with each encounter that his disdain for the staff was not just a matter of casual neglect, but something much more intentional and malicious. It was one morning, while Emily was wiping down the marble floors in the hallway near Jonathan's office, that she overheard a conversation that made her skin crawl. "I don't know why we're keeping all these people on the payroll," Jonathan said, his voice smooth and cold. "They're costing us money, and for what? They're not even doing their jobs right." His words cut through the air like a knife, dismissing the very people who made the company run efficiently. Emily could feel her chest tighten with indignation, but she remained silent, staying hidden behind a pillar, trying to stay out of sight. Rebecca Harris, the company's CFO, responded with a scoff. "You're right. It's cheaper to let them go, but the problem is there are so many of them. We'd have to fire half the staff just to make any real impact. You know how hard it is to replace these people, and the last thing I want is to deal with the fallout from the press. It's not worth the trouble." "Who cares about the fallout?" Jonathan snapped, his impatience clear. "As long as we save money, that's all that matters. Get rid of the dead weight and let's move forward." Rebecca didn't respond immediately. Instead, there was a long, almost contemplative pause before she replied, "We'll figure it out. Just don't expect any miracles. It's going to take time to get rid of them all." As Emily stood there, listening to their conversation, a sense of disgust washed over her. Jonathan and Rebecca weren't simply careless about the people who worked for them. They actively saw them as obstacles to their own success, a means to an end. It was clear that the well-being of the employees, from the receptionists to the cleaners, meant absolutely nothing to the executives. They were willing to sacrifice the livelihoods of hardworking individuals just to increase their profits, all while enjoying the luxuries of their high-paying positions. But it wasn't just their words that disturbed Emily. It was their actions as well. The more she observed, the more she realized that Jonathan and Rebecca had created a culture where those with power were allowed to indulge in their every whim, while the staff, who kept the company functioning, were treated as expendable. The executives' extravagant behavior was apparent in every aspect of their daily lives. Jonathan was constantly flaunting his wealth, arriving in a new, gleaming car each week, and wearing suits that cost more than some employees made in a year. Meanwhile, Rebecca dined at the finest restaurants, hosting lavish meetings at five-star hotels, all on the company's dime. Emily, on the other hand, had to make do with the scraps left behind after Jonathan and Rebecca had indulged in their excess. She had seen it firsthand, how the cleanerial staff was treated with disdain. One afternoon, as she was emptying the trash cans in the main conference room, Jonathan strode past her, stopping only to give her a cold, piercing glance. "You're supposed to be cleaning, not standing around," he said, his voice laced with mockery. "Maybe if you actually did your job, the place wouldn't look so filthy." Emily bit her tongue, the urge to respond boiling in her chest, but she knew she couldn't. Not yet, not until she had all the information she needed. She simply nodded and continued her work, her hands trembling with the frustration of having to endure such treatment. In the following days, Jonathan's behavior escalated. He began making crude, suggestive comments to Emily, believing that his position allowed him to say whatever he wanted without consequence. One afternoon, while she was scrubbing the floors in the hallway, he approached her with a smirk on his face, clearly enjoying the discomfort he caused. "You know," Jonathan said, his voice low and filled with contempt, "you're pretty cute for a cleaner. Maybe if you showed a little more appreciation, we could work something out. I could help you move up in the company." Emily's heart sank, but she kept her expression neutral, refusing to let him see the effect his words had on her. "I'm just here to do my job, sir," she said, keeping her voice steady despite the disgust churning inside her. Jonathan laughed, a sharp sound that echoed down the hallway. "Of course you are. But you know, we all have to look out for number one, don't we?" he said, his eyes narrowing in a way that sent chills down her spine. "It's just a matter of knowing your place." Emily fought the urge to retort. She knew that this was just a game to him, a way to assert his dominance over someone he deemed inferior. But she wouldn't let him win. She wouldn't let him break her. The more Emily witnessed Jonathan's behavior, the more she became aware of how deeply ingrained the corruption was in the company. This wasn't just an isolated incident. It was part of a larger, systemic problem that had permeated every corner of Davis International Consulting. Jonathan's arrogance, Rebecca's cold indifference, and the blatant disregard for the well-being of the staff all pointed to one undeniable truth. The company was no longer the place of integrity it had once been. Emily couldn't stand by and do nothing any longer. It was time to take action. But first, she needed more information, more proof of the executive's unethical behavior. She needed to know just how far Jonathan and Rebecca were willing to go to protect their interests, even at the expense of the company and its employees. And she was willing to play their game, silently observing and gathering evidence until the right moment arrived. The days blended into one another as Emily continued her quiet observation of the toxic undercurrents swirling within Davis International Consulting. The more she witnessed Jonathan Turner and Rebecca Harris's manipulative and unethical actions, the more repulsed she became by their behavior. It became clear to Emily that these two individuals were not just careless. They were actively dismantling everything she had spent years building. Every comment, every decision, every action they took further confirmed the depths of the rot that had set in. Emily was no fool. She had spent years at the helm of this company, and although her face was never known by the employees, they respected her. She had built Davis International Consulting from the ground up, putting in countless hours, making sacrifices, and driving the company to become the powerhouse it was. Emily had always prided herself on her ability to stay under the radar. She had purposefully kept her identity hidden from the staff, her personal life and image sealed off from the prying eyes of the world, trusting only her loyal secretary and the select few who helped run the company. But as she stood there, cleaning the lobby yet again, she realized she could not continue hiding in the shadows. Not any longer. The company she loved, the company she founded, was crumbling, and it was her responsibility to stop the destruction before it was too late. Emily's time as a cleaner had given her a unique vantage point. She had watched Jonathan and Rebecca's behavior without their knowledge, listening to their scheming, their cruelty, their disregard for anyone but themselves. She had seen their insatiable lust for power and wealth. But now, it was time to shift gears. It was time for Emily to stop playing the role of a silent observer and become the force that would expose the truth and bring justice to the company. It was time to reclaim the company from those who sought to ruin it. But the first step in Emily's plan was not as simple as barging into Jonathan's office and confronting him. No, she needed to be strategic. She needed to ensure that the board of directors, the people who still had some respect for the company's values, would back her when the time came. The more Emily thought about it, the more it became clear to her that Jonathan and Rebecca had never truly cared about the company. They were only interested in how much money they could make, how much power they could seize, and how much luxury they could indulge in. She had watched them waste company resources, fire employees without warning, and lie about their intentions, all in the name of saving a few dollars. They had undermined the very foundations the company had been built upon. Emily knew she had to act quickly. But first, she needed to gather more evidence, something irrefutable, something that would force even the most loyal board member to side with her. She needed proof that Jonathan and Rebecca were not just unethical, they were a danger to the company's survival. That night, after the office had emptied and the building was quiet, Emily snuck into the CEO's office. She had spent months learning the layout of the building, memorizing the security codes and getting familiar with the guards' routines. There was no way she could have done this during the day, not with Jonathan or Rebecca around. But now, in the dead of night, it was her chance to root out the hidden corruption once and for all. The CEO's office was spacious, with a luxurious desk and an enormous window overlooking the city skyline. But the moment Emily stepped inside, she felt an overwhelming sense of disdain. The office, once a symbol of leadership and vision, now felt like a throne room of excess, ruled by a tyrant. As she carefully walked toward the desk, Emily's eyes fell upon a folder that was sitting on top of a pile of papers. It was labeled Employee Reduction Plan. With a steady hand, Emily picked up the folder and began flipping through the pages. The documents were damning. Jonathan and Rebecca had been working together to cut costs by systematically firing employees who had been with the company for years. Not only were they planning to eliminate workers who were considered essential to the company's operations, but they were also planning to eliminate positions without even consulting with other departments. They were doing this without any regard for the impact it would have on the people involved, not to mention the company's future. Emily's hands trembled with anger as she read through the plan. Jonathan's signature was on every page, and Rebecca had signed off on the layoffs with an almost eerie nonchalance. The company's future, its very existence, was being tossed aside in favor of short-term profits. But that wasn't all Emily found. Beneath the stack of papers, she discovered another folder, one that was completely unrelated to employee layoffs. This folder was filled with confidential financial documents. As Emily leafed through them, her stomach dropped. The amount of money Jonathan and Rebecca were siphoning off for their personal use was staggering. They had been funneling company funds into private accounts, engaging in fraudulent activity that was not only illegal but also highly unethical. They had taken money from the company that was meant to support its growth and instead used it to fund their lavish lifestyles, luxury vacations, extravagant dinners, and expensive gifts. It was sickening. Emily knew then that there was no turning back. Jonathan and Rebecca had crossed a line, and it was up to her to ensure they paid the price. But she didn't want to act hastily. The last thing she needed was for them to cover their tracks or for the board to be swayed by their wealth and influence. Emily was no longer just a silent observer. She was a force to be reckoned with. The next morning, after gathering all the evidence she needed, Emily made her decision. It was time to reveal her true identity. No longer would she stand idly by as Jonathan and Rebecca destroyed everything she had built. Emily Davis, the woman behind the scenes, would come forward and take her place as the rightful leader of Davis International Consulting. She walked into the building that morning, her uniform as a cleaner now replaced by a simple, yet elegant, professional outfit. As she strode past the reception desk, the staff barely recognized her. She had never made her appearance known before. To them, she had always been the silent, unseen woman who kept the building clean and tidy. Emily entered the boardroom, and as the doors swung open, she stood before the stunned faces of the board members. They knew who she was, but they didn't know she had been working under the guise of a cleaner for the past several months. "Good morning, everyone," Emily began, her voice calm but commanding. "I'm Emily Davis, the founder of this company, and I've come to take back what is rightfully mine." The board members sat in stunned silence, unsure of how to react. Emily's eyes swept across the room, meeting the gaze of each person present. It was time to put an end to the corruption. It was time to take back control. "I've gathered all the evidence I need to expose Jonathan Turner and Rebecca Harris for what they truly are," Emily continued. "And I will not stop until they are held accountable for their actions." The room was thick with tension as Emily prepared to reveal the extent of their deceit, their greed, and their negligence. She had taken the first step toward restoring the company to its former glory, and there was no turning back now. The morning air felt different, sharper, as Emily walked through the entrance of Davis International Consulting. The quiet hum of the office seemed almost deafening as she passed through the familiar hallways she had once walked daily, cleaning the floors and keeping to the shadows. Today, however, she was not the unseen cleaner. She was the woman who had built this company from the ground up, and she was about to make her presence known to everyone. She had a purpose, a mission, and a promise to herself that she would no longer stay hidden. It had been months since Emily had made the decision to return, months since she had watched her beloved company falter under the control of Jonathan Turner and Rebecca Harris. The slow, insidious destruction of Davis International Consulting had cut her to the core, but now she would reclaim what was hers. As she walked past the reception desk, Emily's footsteps echoed, reverberating through the empty halls. She could feel the stares of the staff as they glanced up from their desks, some confused, others curious, unsure of what was happening. Emily wasn't wearing the cleaner's uniform today. Instead, she was dressed in a sharp, professional suit, a quiet but confident testament to the transformation she had undergone. The heels of her shoes clicked sharply against the polished floor as she made her way to the boardroom. This time, there would be no cleaning supplies in her hands, no sweeping away the dirt beneath her feet. Today, she would sweep away the corruption that had taken root within the company. The door to the boardroom stood before her, and Emily hesitated for only a moment, taking a deep breath. She had planned this moment carefully, and now it was time to execute. She pushed open the door, stepping into the room with the same grace and authority that she had once commanded as the CEO. The boardroom fell silent. Around the table sat Jonathan Turner, Rebecca Harris, and the rest of the senior executives. They were deep in conversation, discussing the company's future, or rather, their attempts to maintain the facade of success. When they saw her, there was a moment of confusion, as none of them immediately recognized the woman who had entered. It wasn't unusual for a cleaner to walk in during a meeting, but this woman, this figure standing confidently at the door, was not just any ordinary employee. For a long moment, Emily allowed the silence to stretch, the tension building in the room. The executives exchanged glances, some of them muttering under their breath, wondering who this woman was. She knew they had no idea who she was. After all, she had carefully concealed her identity for years. To them, Emily Davis was just a name in the company records, a faceless presence that existed only in the shadows of corporate decisions. Without saying a word, Emily walked to the head of the table, her heels clicking against the floor with each step. The sharp sounds echoed in the otherwise quiet room, and it became increasingly clear that something monumental was about to happen. Finally, she reached the head of the table, her seat, the very place she had once occupied as the CEO. She sat down, pulling out a set of documents she had meticulously prepared and placed them in front of her. The room was now fully aware that something had shifted. Jonathan and Rebecca exchanged uncertain looks, their confident facades faltering ever so slightly. "Good morning, everyone," Emily said, her voice calm but powerful. It was a voice they had never heard before, the voice of authority. She was no longer the invisible cleaner. She was Emily Davis, the founder and the CEO of Davis International Consulting. Jonathan blinked in disbelief, his brow furrowed as he processed the situation, clearly thrown off guard. "Excuse me." "Who are you?" he asked, his voice still carrying a touch of arrogance, though it was now tempered with confusion. Emily didn't flinch. Instead, she leaned forward slightly, locking eyes with Jonathan, then Rebecca, and finally the others around the table. "I am Emily Davis," she said slowly, enunciating each word clearly. "I am the CEO of this company, and I have been for years." The shock in the room was palpable. Whispers and muttered questions filled the air as the executives struggled to comprehend what was happening. Emily remained composed, her hands folded neatly on the table as she prepared to explain herself. "I know this is unexpected," Emily continued, her gaze sweeping the room, "but I have a few things I need to say. I left this company for health reasons some time ago. I entrusted the day-to-day operations to Jonathan Turner and Rebecca Harris. I thought they would lead this company to greater heights. But as you can see, that is not what has happened." Her eyes flashed as she met the gaze of both Jonathan and Rebecca, who now looked visibly uncomfortable. "The company has declined under their leadership. The values we once stood for have been lost. And now, I am back to restore what has been tarnished." Emily paused, allowing her words to settle in the room before continuing. "When I left, I never revealed my identity to the staff. I wanted to ensure that the company would be run without bias, without influence from my personal life. I placed my trust in Jonathan and Rebecca to handle the operations in my absence, and unfortunately, they have failed. I have watched from the sidelines. I've seen everything. And now, I am stepping back in, not as the unseen founder but as the leader who will guide this company back to its former glory." The room was silent, the executives still processing the revelation. Jonathan, his usual smug demeanor now replaced with something far more anxious, opened his mouth to speak but faltered. He had never expected Emily to return in such a dramatic fashion. He had no idea how to handle the situation. Rebecca, too, looked caught off guard. The CFO, who had once wielded power over financial decisions, was now facing the woman whose leadership she had undermined. Both of them had thought they could operate without consequence, but now they were facing the person who held the reins of the company. Emily stood up, her presence commanding the room's attention. "I'm not here to dwell on the past. I'm here to move forward and ensure that this company does not fall any further. I will be taking back control, and we will start by addressing the ethical failures that have been allowed to thrive here." The board members, still reeling from the shock of Emily's return, exchanged uncertain glances. One by one, they began to understand the magnitude of what was happening. Emily wasn't just back to observe. She was here to take charge, to restore the company to its rightful place at the top. "I've already taken the necessary steps," Emily said, a flicker of determination in her eyes. "I've gathered evidence of the misconduct that has taken place under Jonathan and Rebecca's leadership, and I intend to take it to the board of directors. There will be no tolerance for corruption or unethical behavior any longer. We will restore integrity to this company." The shock of her words began to sink in. The executives, who had once been so confident in their power, now found themselves on the defensive. The balance of power had shifted, and they realized they were no longer in control. Emily Davis was back, and she was here to take the reins once again.
The shockwaves from Emily's revelation as the CEO of Davis International Consulting had barely begun to settle when she took swift and decisive action. The room still buzzed with disbelief, but Emily was no longer concerned with the stunned faces of the executives around her. She had been waiting for this moment for far too long. The damage caused by Jonathan Turner and Rebecca Harris was beyond repair, and it was time to eliminate the sources of corruption once and for all. As she stood at the head of the table, Emily could feel the weight of her decision pressing heavily on her shoulders, but she knew it was the right one. She had built this company from the ground up, and no amount of greed, arrogance, or deceit would stand in her way now. Davis International Consulting had once been a beacon of success, built on integrity, respect, and hard work. She had been the heart of that foundation, and now she would restore it. "Jonathan, Rebecca," Emily began, her voice firm and unyielding. "I've given you both ample time to prove yourselves, and yet you've continuously undermined the company's values. Your actions have not only hurt the employees, but have also tainted the very principles that this company was founded upon. As a result, I'm left with no choice but to remove you both from your positions effective immediately." There was a stunned silence in the room, broken only by Jonathan's loud scoff. His arrogance hadn't faded, and he still believed he could control the situation. "You can't just do this," Jonathan said, his voice shaky with disbelief. "I've been running this company for years. I'm the CEO. You're just some woman who—" "I was the CEO," Emily interrupted coldly, her gaze unwavering. "You were a temporary placeholder who failed to understand the responsibilities that come with leadership. You've abused your position for far too long. Now, you're being let go." Rebecca, who had been sitting quietly by, finally spoke up, her tone icy with defiance. "This is insane. You can't just walk in here and expect us to fall in line. We've done what's necessary to keep the company running." She started, but Emily cut her off. "No, Rebecca," Emily said, her voice calm but powerful. "You've done what was necessary for you, not for the company. You've lined your pockets with luxury while the people who built this company, your employees, have been treated like dirt. That ends today." The tension in the room was suffocating as the reality of the situation began to sink in. Jonathan and Rebecca, once so full of arrogance, now found themselves at the mercy of the woman they had underestimated. There was no escaping the consequences of their actions. With a quick motion, Emily signaled for the head of Human Resources, who had been silently observing the scene, to step forward. Please escort Mr. Turner and Ms. Harris out of the building. Their positions are terminated effective immediately. Without another word, the HR manager nodded and moved to escort Jonathan and Rebecca out of the room. Jonathan stood up, still trying to maintain a semblance of dignity, but the humiliation on his face was evident. He knew there was nothing he could do to salvage his career here. Rebecca, too, looked defeated, though she tried to mask her shock with a scowl. Together, they left the boardroom, the door slamming behind them with finality. As the door closed, Emily turned her attention back to the remaining executives and employees in the room. "Now that the rot has been removed," she said, her tone steady but filled with authority, "we can begin to rebuild. I won't tolerate any further breaches of ethics or misconduct. This company will be based on fairness, respect, and hard work. Anyone unwilling to work under these new values is free to leave." There was a moment of silence, followed by a slow, hesitant round of applause from the staff, who had remained loyal to the company. Emily's resolve had been crystal clear, and for the first time in months, the employees of Davis International Consulting felt a sense of hope. But Emily knew this was just the beginning. Firing Jonathan and Rebecca was merely the first step in a much larger process of restoration. The company had suffered under their leadership, and it would take more than a few decisions to set things right. Emily needed to ensure that every level of the company returned to the values it had once upheld. "Let's get to work," Emily continued, her voice gaining strength. "We have a lot to do, but we'll do it together." In the weeks that followed, Emily worked tirelessly to rebuild Davis International Consulting. She started by meeting with each department head to understand the current state of affairs. Many of the employees had been afraid to speak out under Jonathan and Rebecca's reign, but with Emily back in control, they began to open up about the mismanagement, poor decisions, and toxic atmosphere that had taken hold. Emily immediately began implementing sweeping changes. She brought in new leadership, people who shared her values and vision for the company. She restructured departments, introduced fairer management practices, and focused on creating an environment where employees felt valued and respected. The first change Emily made was to introduce a transparent feedback system. She wanted to hear from the employees, the people who made the company run. Under Jonathan and Rebecca's leadership, employees had been ignored, their concerns dismissed as insignificant. Emily knew that for the company to succeed, she needed the support of everyone, not just the executives. Emily also worked to restore the company's reputation with its clients. Davis International Consulting had once been known for its high standards and ethical business practices, but under Jonathan and Rebecca's leadership, that reputation had been tarnished. Emily personally reached out to key clients, reassuring them of the changes and improvements being made. Slowly but surely, the company began to regain its footing. Despite the challenges, Emily remained resolute. She knew it would take time to rebuild the trust that had been lost. But she was determined to make Davis International Consulting a company of integrity once again. As the months passed, Emily's efforts began to pay off. Employee morale improved, and productivity increased. As the company's culture shifted toward collaboration, respect, and accountability, the toxic atmosphere that had once permeated the office began to fade, replaced by a sense of purpose and community. Emily also implemented programs to support the professional development of employees, ensuring that everyone had opportunities to grow within the company. She wanted them to feel like they were an integral part of the company's success, not just cogs in a machine. As for Jonathan and Rebecca, their departures were not without consequences. Both of them faced legal action for their unethical practices, and though Emily was not the one to seek vengeance, she made sure that their actions did not go unpunished. The company's board of directors fully supported Emily's decisions, and with their backing, she moved forward with her plans to rebuild Davis International Consulting from the ground up. In the end, Emily's decision to return as the CEO had proven to be the right one. It was not an easy path, but with determination, integrity, and a commitment to the employees and clients who had supported her over the years, Emily had managed to turn the company around. Davis International Consulting was on its way to becoming the thriving, ethical business it had once been, stronger, more united, and more focused than ever before. And Emily Davis, the woman who had silently watched from the sidelines for so long, was now leading the charge into a new era of success and integrity.